Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you all might be. Welcome to the bringing back of Ask the Experts. This is your Q&A panel for anything and everything Kentico experience. This panel has been done, I think, a few times before. I say panel, we're going to call it a show. It's going to be called a show now. This is the Ask the Experts show, and we are live, as you can see, as I change things up on the fly for us here. But we've done this at Kentico at least 2 times in the past. We've brought this show, we've started this show, ended it, brought it back. We're going to try it again this time. So hopefully everybody's out there having a good day. I am thankful to be joined here by some amazing Kentico experience experts, and I'm going to let those guys introduce themselves today.
Should I start?
Yeah, it's round robin. It's round robin. So answer what you want. So that's the way this is going to work. Unlike the Kentico experience panel we did at Connection this past month or a month ago, this is going to be, we're going to talk about it. It's going to be more conversational rather than just going around the table here. So we'll start off in the upper right corner with Trevor today.
How's it going? Trevor Payas here with Heartland Business Systems. I've been a Kentico MVP for a couple years now, and some of you probably know me from my various modules and plugins and tools that I like to build for the Kentico platform. Developer advocate, really want to make sure that everyone is able to leverage Kentico fully, and also try to help developers as they transition from one thing to the next. That's my specialty because I'm new to some of this stuff too. So.
Cool. So I'll pick it up next. I'm Jeroen Fürst. I'm 38 years old and from the Netherlands. So it's the afternoon for me. I've been working with Kentico for around, let's say, 14 years now. So pretty long. And I've been a Kentico MVP for 10 years, starting with version number 2.0B, I think it was. I like to work with cutting edge tech. That's why I like Kentico. And I also like to help the community out. And like Ryan said, I've done this Ask the Experts previously as well. So I'm happy that it's back on the table.
Awesome. And so I've got to point out, folks, you cannot knock a guy who has the original Ninja Turtles poster in his background right there. That just melts my heart because I watch some of these new things. I'm like, I like the classics myself. So I love the classic NJ. TMN, what is it? Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, TMNT. That's it.
I think they had some variations where we had Hero Turtles and you had the Ninja, or was it the other way around?
We had Ninja Turtles. There was always Ninja Turtles here.
So we had the Hero Turtles. Cool. All right, Sean.
Hi, my name's Sean Wright. I work for a digital marketing and web development agency, Wired Views, in Northeast Ohio. I've been a Kentico MVP for not quite a year now. I spend a lot of time blogging and writing about Kentico and things like design patterns, testing, all sorts of stuff. Yeah.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. All right. So I mentioned earlier that Connection happened just over a month ago. So I think what the first thing we're going to just talk about, let's do a reflection on Connection of 2020 here. So what did you guys think? What were some of your highlights that you can remember from the Connections conference?
All right. So I must say that I'd like to attend all of them. And because the Connections this year a little bit different than previous years where it was all online. But the good thing, at least I found, was that you could attend all 3 the Connections. And only downside that you had to get up very early or stay up very late. But I mean, it's nice to tag along the community. And that was also one of the things that I liked about the Connections, is to see the familiar faces back, have the discussions in the lounge area, and just talk with other I always like to call them enthusiasts, people that really like Kentico. So that was really cool. And from a content perspective, I think they did a really great job around the .NET Core .NET Core announcements. As Kentico Experience 13 was released a month ago, and with that release, .NET Core is now considered one of the main development models that we need to pick up, and was really excited to see all the announcements around .NET Core and the talks about that. So
yeah, so you mentioned that. That is, I mean, every year we have Connection, and it is done 3 times a year. One in the APAC, that's Asia Pacific region. The other one is in EMEA, European. And then the last one is North America. So we have it. So this year, like Jeroen said, was all virtual, which means it was actually really easy. I say easy. You have to get up or stay up late, but you could attend all 3 very easily. So that was one of the big differences. And I'm curious from the community, did you like the virtual conference versus like an in-person? Let us know in the chat, because I really would love to get some feedback on that, to see what you all thought. And that's the other thing, MVPs. Did you like did you miss the in-person conferences, or did you like the virtual ones only?
I miss the in-person. I know, I think all of us have been to the Connection conferences and just love interacting with one another, being able to say hi, sit down and actually talk. And of course, for me, the snacks in between. I was always the guy getting the cookie run of the refreshment table. Everyone knows that. But no, I really miss the connections. I hope this whole COVID thing finally blows over with the vaccines, so we can get back to doing that. I do really like that the last Connection, though, was experience focused. Like, they now split it into like an experience one and a content one. So that way we can really focus a lot of our effort, or a lot of our talks, on those specific platforms, versus, one or the other, and then trying to mix match and stuff like that. Because I really am all about experience. I'm an experienced guy, and love the platform and building sites off of it, and tools and stuff. So that's one thing I do miss, though, the in-person. It's always fun to kind of have a business trip and just get together and stuff.
I think that was, for me, that was one of the hardest things. I don't know about you guys, was with the family in the house, and sometimes, kids running around, I have enough time getting them to stay out of the office while I'm doing live stream stuff, or recording and that kind of stuff. But sometimes when you're attending a conference, it's good to get away from it all. It's good to get away from everything, and just that way you can solely focus on that. I think next year, if we do still have a virtual one, I may say, hey, boss, can I go rent a hotel room? You guys pay for a hotel room, and I'll stay there for a night or 2. And my wife would love that. She's like, you're going where? No. You get to stay with the kids, and she will use the hotel room, is what I would get told. So.
Yeah, that's right. For me, it typically starts when I went to the airport, usually, and see the familiar faces. But also come at the hotel, see the guys, and talk, have a drink and chat around everything around Kentico. And I think that if you compare it to this virtual one, it was only within these time constraints of the event taking place. While in the in-person one, it starts way early in the morning at the breakfast in the hotel, and ends after a social event in the evening. And those facets, they weren't there with the virtual one. And I think where the name has connection, which means you connect and link with other people, I think that that aspect was, I think, compared to the in-person events, the least visible. What's your take on it, Sean? Did you?
Yeah, so Connection North America last year was my first Kentico Connection, so I don't have a ton to compare it to this year's. I think there's pros and cons to having a virtual conference. A con is that some of those discussions that you have at a in-person conference that start up naturally. You have a group of people standing around chatting about something. Someone hears something mentioned that they're interested in and walks up and just starts listening and then maybe jumps in the conversation. That stuff happens organically, and it can be, I think, less intimidating for people that want to participate in that in-person setting because you can kind of ease yourself into it. Whereas with a virtual conference, you're kind of like, do you want to turn on your mic? Do you want to turn on your camera? Some people aren't comfortable with that. So I think that that can be an impediment to having that same experience with a virtual conference. At the same time, having Kentico Experience Connection virtual for 3 conferences this year meant that there was an opportunity for everyone to attend. It was also free, so anyone could sign up, anyone could attend. And I think that opens the door for a lot of people that normally couldn't, get away from home. Maybe their business couldn't expense it. Any number of reasons why they wouldn't normally be able to attend, and now they can with a virtual conference. So, there's different ways of looking at it. I liked this year's conference. I thought, like everyone mentioned, there's a bunch of great conversations around the direction that experience is taking, technologies. I thought the virtual tables, the discussion tables were good. I got to have lots of great conversations with some really smart people. So I felt like I benefited a lot from it, but yeah, it kind of is what it is.
Ryan, do you have any numbers in terms of like a normal connection attendance or a live one versus the online?
So you asked that. That was actually what I was thinking of whenever Sean mentioned that. I don't have the comparison on the numbers. I do know that we saw APAC had our lowest set of numbers, and then we went EMEA, Europe had the next. And I'm honestly trying to think about what those numbers were that we had current live. So the average live, I think, and I'll get it wrong, and somebody will be sending me a message on Teams here that's wrong. But I want to say it was, I want to say 140 is what's sticking in my mind at APAC, and then it went up to I think 180 in Europe, and then the next one I can't think of what North America was, but it had a lot larger attendance, and we did see a lot more interactivity in North America versus the other conferences. And chat room, if you're out there, I'm curious as to what you think could be better. I know Sean pointed out some of the things, people just not comfortable enough jumping online, throwing their camera out there, throwing their audio. It's not as easy, at least in my mind, to sneak into a conversation, listen, see, hey, do I want to be a part of it? And then if you're like, oh, nope, that's not me, sneak back out. Then a virtual one, you see people pop in that window. Oh, somebody new. Let's talk to them. And it can be a very uncomfortable situation.
Yeah, if you're working from home, you're kind of inviting someone into your house by turning on your camera, which is not the same experience as being in a hotel lobby and, walking up into a conversation that's kind of a neutral space. So different people are going to feel different levels of comfort with that sort of social engagement.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I'm one of those people too. As much live streaming and this kind of stuff that I do, I am an introvert by nature. This is actually outside of my normal wheelhouse. And it can be exhausting. Be completely honest with everyone. This kind of stuff can be exhausting and taxing on someone who is naturally more reserved, more quiet, likes to be that face in the crowd and just like stand back and nobody be noticed. So I fully understand, everybody's reservations, as well as you just said, you're inviting everybody into your house. You never know when a 4-year-old or a 9-year-old, 10-year-old now in my case, is going to pop in and want to say hi to everybody. Some people bring their kids to the conference, which is awesome. I would love to start bringing my son soon, if we can afford it, if we can budget it correctly, to some of the conferences that I'm going to be going to. But
I almost wonder if like that might be something to look into, do a hybrid approach in future connections, because I do see the benefit that, it is a trip, like for instance, for Heartland, we have a couple of our people go, but not every person in our team can go to the conference like that. So having a hybrid approach where there still is a live, where there's an online presence, but also the in-person, I wonder how that would work. Might be something to think on, just at least to live stream it so people can see the things and interact and stuff. I'd ever like to being able to see the chat, like the chat during the conference was awesome, because they're going through, they're popping in questions, and then we could actually interact with the people during those questions and stuff, which is awesome.
Yeah, and to have the recordings is also very cool. So you can always watch them afterwards if you missed them, or if you want to relook at them. So that was a really good job also from Kentico, because in the previous years, not all sessions were recorded. So with this virtual one, you have at least have that. So.
And I think that's one thing, the experience team, the new marketing team. So for those who don't know, we went through a growing period this past year, and we made some tough decisions from an organization perspective to basically split the two products. And if you didn't know, we actually have two products. We have Kentico Content, which is our, I call it our software as a service platform. And that's not going to be the only software as a service product, but it is a completely online only platform. It is not something you would install in your environment at all. It's something that we host, and you connect to. The admin is all online. Completely web focused from the admin perspective. But from the front end perspective, it's whatever you want to do. We provide you APIs, SDKs for all the popular platforms out there, and it's continuing to grow too as our DevRel team looks and tries new things and figures out how they can improve that on the content side. But then we also have the experience, which is what used to be called Kentico. It was synonymous. When you said Kentico, you were talking about the all-in-one solution, the front end, the back end built together. What a lot of people deem their traditional CMS, but experience is more than that. Experience just isn't a CMS or a content management system or the EMS, enterprise. Is that what it was for? Mm-hmm. Enterprise management system. It's more than that. It's a digital experience platform. So it's not just managing your content. It's managing the entire life cycle of your engagement with your customers, with your users. And so I think that's a hurdle that some people, myself included, have to get over. As I look at it from a content perspective a lot of times, and serving up content. As a developer, that's what I do. I build things to serve up content. But from a business perspective, it is tons more than that. And I know we've got some, from a Kentico's perspective, by the way, I work for Kentico. I don't think I introduced myself. My name's Ryan. I am the developer evangelist for Kentico Experience, if you didn't know that. Hi, nice to meet you. And so I do work for Kentico. I am an employee there. And when I say we, I mean us as an organization. And we've got a lot of content I know our marketing department is putting together to help clear up that blurred line. What is a CMS? What is a DXP? I talked to them yesterday about some of the content that they're going to be producing and answering that exact question, because I know our partners and stuff out there have kind of sometimes missed that mark, that it's more than that. It's not just a CMS.
And I like to add that also it's not just even the digital experience part of it, although that's a big piece. I mean, a lot of our clients leverage Kentico because you can build whole systems off of it. So we have one client that their entire product and asset system, thousands of procs, documents, images, they're all related to it and manage and categorize are all built into Kentico's UI. We have another one that does all their, at the hospital, and they do all their sites of cares and their providers and all that stuff. So it also is a huge platform that you can build those systems with the user interfaces to manage it. And especially now as we move more and more into MVC and .NET Core, you can leverage a lot of those systems to make your own APIs and your own data endpoints for other applications. So we're also using it as a central hub for some of that data because of the ease of development and the user interfaces and all the pieces that go into being able to create your own management systems really for some of the stuff. So that's another reason why we leverage it heavily, because you either do a completely custom app, like just building it straight up, or we do Kentico because it has all the pieces built in, and oftentimes the Kentico ones are going to be able to produce that functionality a lot quicker in the experience platform.
So as we start talking about that, we're gonna switch topics here. So I think we've gone on. We're moving on from connection. So by the way, if you all missed it in the chat room, there's a link to it, as well as you can see here on screen. You just go to connection.experience.io. All the videos there from our connections are available. And as you can see, there's that handsome devil right there. That guy, he knows how to host. So. But it's everyone, everything. We did have 3 different panels. And so it's not just, you're not just going to get one panel. I mean, we had a lot of these guys were a part of at least one, if not multiple panels. You get to catch and watch all those panels because everyone's got a different opinion. We asked the same questions, and we got different answers. And sometimes even these guys' answers changed just a little bit because they heard something new, heard something different. So check it out.
Nice.
Let us know what everyone thought. Did we get it right? Did we get it wrong? You can throw comments into this chat. Always, you can hit us up on social media. As you can see, we have our social media stuff on there. Hit us up there. Let us know, what do we get right, what we get wrong, what needs to be better. And as we go to that, let's just go down the list of the topics here. Because one of them is, we're talking about this ASP.NET Core. We had the major shift this past year, this latest version 13, the Phoenix, and we went all core. We said, you know what, this is the future. It's got a lot of benefits, cross-platform development all over the place, and we said, this is the future. We're still buying into .NET, and I, as a .NET developer, I love that. I love that fact. I've been preaching .NET Core since it was 1.0, actually pre-1.0. I've been following it heavily. But there's been a lot of confusion, I think, around ASP.NET Core MVC versus ASP.NET MVC 5, which is the framework you would be building on if you were leveraging the .NET framework versus the .NET Core. So, because I've seen some confusion in some of the chats I'm seeing that our partners are hearing, customers are seeing, it's like, well, Core MVC versus MVC 5 is different.
It is.
And I know Trevor has been an MVC 5 guy. He learned MVC here, not too long ago. And then we threw him basically to the wolves again and said, hey, by the way, that MVC 5 stuff, yeah, we're going to go Core MVC. So, Trevor, what was your experience as you started moving some of your stuff over from MVC 5 to Core MVC?
Sure. And yeah, so I was originally a portal guy. I built everything in the portal. I love the portal. And then we, of course, made the transition to MVC and relearning that whole platform, going from, web forms to, MVC and now to Core. So I'll say I've already done a lot of work on our baseline site that we're starting to get ready for .NET Core. And to give a summary of the concepts, there's a lot of similarities and there's some catches that I've definitely hit with .NET Core. There's some really nice new features too about .NET Core that I've been enjoying, and especially in terms of creating packages and creating things to share, it's been a breeze. So I guess if you want, mind if I share my screen a little bit?
Yeah, go for it.
All right. So share screen, and here we go. Oh, there we go. Got it. So this is my testing development .NET Core site, just as I start building all the different pieces and stuff. So one thing that I really like about .NET Core is they have this concept called a tag helper. It's where you can actually build in functionality just like their HTML tags and actually hooks into them and does stuff. So we have some things like, Kentico changed their editable area. Instead of doing the @html.editable area, you just have this editable area tag. For the page builder scripts tag, you just add that in there. So your markup becomes a little bit cleaner. It looks a little bit more fluid, and all these pieces get put into place. And I've actually built my own container, which is called a containered section, that allows me to add wrapping around my different elements. So I
Hey,
have
Trevor,
about,
before you go on a little bit more, can we get you to zoom in just a little bit?
yeah, definitely.
I
Thank
mean,
you.
I'm getting old myself. I'm
No,
41
you're
now,
fine.
and my eyes are not the
There
best
we go.
anymore. Looks good
So
now.
these are, like I said, the tags that you can use in HTML5. And this one's a container one. And I have special logic that says if it finds this containered, then you can grab the title, the CSS class, and the container name, and actually have that hooked up into my Kentico to be able to add in those containers. So that was like one cool thing that I was able to add in. Here's the page builder containers that I can add wrapping and styling and stuff onto mine. And that was really easy to not only create, but to create a NuGet package for. Because that leads into the second cool thing about .NET Core, which is Razor Control Libraries, RCLs. So back in MVC5, like we were trying to figure out how to export these widgets, right? So you have the code, you had the views, and in order to export that into a NuGet package, I had this weird boilerplate shareable component thing that I built that allowed you to have a website and your code, and it would build and compile the views, and then do a bunch of magic to combine that into a NuGet package, so you could then finally export it with the views. Razor Control Libraries have that all built in, which is fantastic. So you can actually just build a Razor Control library, and I'll actually show you one because it's just, if I can get my mouse back. My screen's getting a little bit iffy. I'll explore.
Hey Trevor, is that page builder containers, are they similar to like the concept of web part containers that we had?
They're a clone of it. Yep. So you have the exact same concept. I'll finish that. So you can put in your macros at the title, CSS class, container names. Great for things like you have like a Bootstrap layout or a Bootstrap like card you want to do. So it takes this, and you can either pass it a model that inherits that will have these things. So you can do it in like a widget property, or you can just, as you saw in the code, pass in your title, class, and container, or here's my model that allowed me to pass that in. So I wanted to rebuild that functionality. Most people know that I have a bunch of things I carried over from Portal Engine, and they are available already on NuGet packages. Most of my stuff is already done and complete where I have that built. So let me quickly bring up an RCL example, though. Let me go to...
It's interesting looking at tag helpers, how if you squint, you can see web forms user controls. Because it's kind of the same thing, except the markup feels a bit more HTML-ish. It feels less like ASP.NET is trying to hide the web from you, like it was with web forms. At the same time, with the tag helper attributes that kind of light up existing markup, it feels a lot like client-side JavaScript frameworks from the past 5 or 6 years, like Angular or Vue or React, enhancing HTML as opposed to taking over control. So it's kind of cool how ASP.NET Core with things like tag helpers is following the trends that developers are already going down with when they're doing web development in other areas. So it feels a lot more natural. It feels like ASP.NET Core is trying to instead of force the developers to take one approach or the other, is trying to work with them, which is something that I've found I really like when using it.
Indeed.
Yeah.
And, go ahead.
Well, I want to comment or add to that I think that coming from Portal to MVC, for me personally, it was different concepts that I needed to learn, and I think what MVC brings is a lot of flexibility and doing things in different ways, and that you sometimes feel lost in picking the right one. So I think if you compare that to what .NET Core brings, it will also guide you a little bit more into the direction towards achieving the goal of creating a highly scalable website or platform. Go ahead, Trevor.
So this is an RCL, Razor Control Library, and this is the code for my Bootstrap layout tool. Those are familiar, back even in Portal Engine, of course, for MVC, I had the Bootstrap layout tool, where you could add in on your pages sections and containers and just render it up as Bootstrap. Like here's one that says 3 columns, each one's 4 column. You can add additional CSS, and that way allows you to add widgets in those things. But this is the actual library itself. So all I have is my 2 classes. This is my widget, my section, or sorry, not my widget, my section, and all the Kentico wiring up for that, all the properties and stuff. And I have my views inside of the project here. And I have my assembly, just to make sure that Kentico can see it. I have my NuGet packages where I'm actually referencing the Kentico.NET Core web app. And in order to create a NuGet package, I love this. Anything that's .NET Standard and .NET Core does it. Framework does not. If you go to right-click on your property or package, go right-click on your project and go to package. Here's all your NuGet information, your release notes, your version, even the file, everything, and you just click this generate NuGet package on build. That's it. So I just build it, it creates the package, I load it up to NuGet, and instantly it's out and available, where I don't have to do all this other junk. So it's just that alone, like, I was so happy about, because when you have so many packages, like my NuGet package feed is huge. Making it easier for me to be able to do that was a huge blessing, to just say, hey, I don't need to do all this custom stuff for all these NuGet packages. I can just right click and build. So that was another cool thing about .NET Core that I really enjoyed. The things that have been less that have been a little bit harder with .NET Core, though, is there's a couple concepts that are no longer there or are different. One of it being caching. There's no longer an output cache. It doesn't exist in .NET Core without a lot of customization. Some people have attempted it. So that's something that I leveraged heavily. And so we're still trying to figure out, working with Kentico to find a really good solution for that. Another thing is that you can't call a action from within a view. So before you could do HTML render action and call it, that's no longer possible. So now instead you have a partial action.
View component.
Thank you, a view component.
Yeah.
So you have view components, which are pretty much the same as a controller in action. It's just a single instance. So now some of that logic needs to be migrated into a view component. So we're working through some of those things. And then lastly, it's just a different way of wiring things up. So your app start and your global.ACX are, you don't have a global ASCX, and the starting is wiring up a little bit differently. Some different concepts in terms of the workflow, and see things called middleware, where it intersects the path at different areas and modifies the request and does all this different stuff. So there's a lot of new concepts that for me, trying to learn was difficult, but once you cross that hurdle, you start getting more familiar with it. So it is a learning gap, but I think a lot of people are probably further ahead than I am in terms of they maybe be starting on .NET Core and start on MVC versus starting on web forms and Portal Engine. So these concepts might be more familiar to them and more in line. But for those that, like us, that are a little more older and a little more seasoned in older technologies, it was a little bit of a migration, but we're trying to smooth that out for you guys as much as we can. And hopefully soon the baseline will be out that you guys will have a good starting point with a couple tools to be able to start tweaking things. I know Brian McKeever also made a really nice instant .NET Core blog or boilerplate that's like a one-click launch, and then you can get going with it. So you have to check out his channel for that.
I think we're all equally new to at least experience in .NET Core, because it hasn't been possible before the beginning of November. So we're kind of all on the same boat there, even if we have a decade of Kentico experience or since 2016 been working with ASP or .NET Core. So I'm interested to see what the experience community comes up with in terms of best practices or patterns or tricks or solutions to making the experience in ASP.NET Core developer process or solution process not just great, but amazing or special or unique to experience, which I think there's lots of possibilities there. You can already see, like Trevor mentioned, with the tag helpers, that experience gives us out of the box. So you can tell that the experience development team that's building out the APIs and helping us with this migration to .NET Core is really considering the platform of ASP.NET Core and .NET Core to be something they want to integrate with very closely. It's not just, well, it'll work with ASP.NET Core. No, they're making it so that it's a first-class citizen, that experience feels good when building on ASP.NET Core.
And you mentioned that, and I think that's the key thing to take away. We're putting a lot of effort behind that because, and I think even when developing web applications in the past, it's been sometimes a pain. You can get it developed, but then it's that next step. It's how do you go to the next step from development to to deployments, to usage, to testing, all this other kind of stuff. And I mean, that's the other benefit that you're getting with .NET Core is the testability of a lot of the different areas has just been blown wide open. Before, you had strong types. Sometimes there were classes that were kind of hidden. You couldn't fake them. And you had to build these elaborate workarounds just to even test some of this code. And so with .NET Core, interfaces, dependency injection, all the things you get out of the box with .NET Core. I mean, it is available in the framework and stuff like that. But like Sean said, that this is a first-class citizen, and kind of the best practice that Microsoft does. If you really want to make something that's really good and fast, this is how you do it. So now we started talking about some of the stuff, and I think we segued in. Forgive me if I missed that we did answer this, but one of the next things we have: what benefits does .NET Core offer for reusable widgets and code to use across multiple sites in a single Kentico instance?
I think that really comes down to those Razor class libraries. Creating those RCLs, you can make widgets super quick and easy and publish them to NuGet quick, and thus you can share them. If you have an internal NuGet feed, you can also leverage them internally, or you can share them with the community, which I always encourage. Heartland Business Systems always has been an advocate of, hey, let's get this out to the community. Let's get these tools out there so everyone can learn and grow. And so, yeah, that alone, those RCLs, which isn't necessarily a experience thing, it's a .NET Core thing. That's been awesome, and that makes it super easy to do. Versus before, it was kind of a pain sometimes, especially if you had views to piece that together into a package.
If I'm understanding this question correctly, I think it's a very interesting one. Okay. In the Portal Engine world, when you would have, let's say, 5 or 6 sites running in the same Kentico install, you had a couple options of how you wanted to do that. One is you could have you could try to do separate code bases, kind of split out, and have them each respond to requests for specific domains. But what you generally did was you'd have, if you wanted a lot of customization, you'd have some web parts that you only used on certain sites. And so you'd have this big code base where you'd have multiple variations of things, or some bits of code that were only used for certain domains or certain sites, even though it's all within the same code base. With MVC or .NET Core, you could have the same backend, but the front end could be completely separate applications with their own code base, right? So you have like 5 or 6 ASP.NET Core apps, and they're all running off the same database using web farms. And in that case, you could create a widget that is shared across those, like Trevor mentioned, using a shared NuGet package. But you could also have completely independent widgets or reusable pieces that maybe weren't completely reusable, were focused on a specific site. And I think that could, if you have a large enough site, a complex enough site, it could help in reducing the complexity of what's being used where, because it would be much clearer. You'd have a shared NuGet package installed to all the sites for like a shared bootstrap section, and then for the widgets that were specific to each site, they would only exist in each of those ASP.NET Core projects.
what I think, because I think it's also a very interesting question, is considering the multiple site direction that Kentico is heading, where in the foreseeable future there will be probably a separate new admin user interface, which will be more tightly coupled to the .NET Core project. So I'm wondering if in the future it will still be possible to have like a multi-tenant setup where you have one single database linked to a admin UI and have multiple front ends. I'm not really sure if that's still something viable in the future. But it's definitely interesting to reshare those concepts. And when I look at it, I think resharing that outside the instance is also something that makes sense. So you have like your own library of widgets and components to share to your customers and maybe even share broader. So what do you guys think? Is that something, does it make sense what I mentioned, or?
Yeah, I think it depends a lot on what types of projects you work on. If you work for a company where you're not an agency, like, we all work for agencies, so we're building lots of different sites all the time.
Right.
But you might work for a company where you have a team of 2 or 3 developers and you work on the experience application for your company, in which case you're probably going to find a way to do that, and then you're just going to stick with that, and it's going to work well for that use case, and you're probably going to be reusing a lot. And the experience code, you don't need to package it up, it just exists in the project because you're not sharing it with multiple applications. But for us with agencies, being able to reshare this code helps a lot with developer efficiencies and getting sites up quickly. At the same time, and I kind of covered this in my experience connections talk, I think maybe my perspective on this is a bit different than other developers, but of course, it's good for the community to have different perspectives on these things. I feel like widgets and sections and page templates and all these very front-end focused things tend to, you can make them reusable for sure, but the more reusable you make them, I feel the more opportunity there is for them to not work quite correctly, or to kind of constrain you into following a specific pattern or approach for the design. And I look at widgets and sections as being very tied to the design. So they, right, in my experience, they end up being kind of specific to each project or each application. So you totally can create reusable ones. But in my company's experience, the ones we create, even if there's commonalities between projects, they still end up being specific to those projects because they are so tied to the design. And we typically don't build sites that have the same design between multiple different clients or multiple different projects. If they have the same design, then it's the same client, it's the same project, and that code is, doesn't need to be reused.
To piggyback what Sean's saying, I mean, even amongst the sites that we built so far, the only common widgets we had is the Bootstrap layout tool, the text editor, which Kentico has now built in, which the Frilla, and like a static image. Like those 3 things are pretty much the building blocks of the general, or everything else, as you said, is usually pretty specific. Although there is some cool concept that some people have promoted with having a widget that produces the same HTML output, but then using CSS to make it look different for different clients as well. There's a guy on our team that it's called CSS, not Vibe or something like that, but there's a site that shows all these different templates and it's all the exact same HTML markup with just different CSS. I'll see if I can find that.
So you're talking basically, at that point, it's just a theme. And what you see across a lot of sites now is, I mean, you can think of it light versus dark mode. So we talked a little bit earlier about Brian McKeever, and I think I can pull his up if I have it. But he has the concept of a light versus dark mode, and it's just a toggle. You click that button, and it goes to a more darker, in my opinion, a more eye-friendly, easier on my eyes, theme, color palette. Whereas some people like the bright, whites and all these others, which not mine. I'm a dark mode kind of guy. I live in the dark. So, but yeah, let me see if I can find Brian's site.
Yeah, I think that brings up an interesting idea. There could be a future, and I don't know how soon this would happen, where experience widgets or sections end up being connected to something like a web component or a front-end JavaScript framework component, and you take some of those configuration options and you pass those to the component, and using CSS custom properties and future CSS features like part and theme selectors that let you kind of style into the shadow DOM of a web component. There might be ways where you could create something that needs to be reusable across multiple sites, but still have complete control over design, flexibility, and feature toggling, and still not have it look the same when you use it between multiple sites. But that might be something that's a bit more in the future. We got to wait till those CSS features are in all the browsers.
Yeah, all right. I think if I look at how we at TrueLine do these things, that's sort of the goal or the direction that we want to achieve. And we've come quite far with our React approach. So we tend to separate the front-end code in React from MVC. So there is no HTML markup living inside MVC. That's all outside. And the way we try to work with it is to pass in those themes, styles via the components to the front end code to display the right one. But there's always this little complexity of making it reusable, because at the end it's most situations the design is still pretty much towards what the client wants. So it's tightly coupled to the client's wishes and cannot be reused easily. I hope we'll figure something out for that.
I think what Trevor's done with the Bootstrap section is probably the most likely thing to be reusable. Layout, a lot of sites are built with a 12-column grid. We're seeing designers move out of that with things like CSS Grid, moving into more flexible grids, or like a 5-column grid for a site that's it's going to have a very kind of cutting edge design. But most sites are built with a 12-column grid, and because of that, you could build a section that defines that 12-column layout, and it really doesn't have that much influence on the design, or it doesn't constrain the design that much. All it's doing is setting up where things are going to lay out on the page. So that's probably going to be something that would be generally reusable across sites, especially if you use the same CSS framework like Bootstrap Foundation or Tailwind or something like that.
Sorry, lost my train of thought there. I was thinking something, and I was like, wait a second, no. No, yes, that is good. If you saw earlier, and I can't believe I stopped sharing my screen, but yeah, you saw like a little bit of what Brian had done on his screen. Bring it back here, and you talked about those resizable, those flexible grids, which I don't know exactly what he's using here, but there it goes. Now it's starting to. As you can see, things starting to reorient, reshape, and everything. And I know he said he's got a little bit of work to do on his mobile experience, but I mean, that's what you're getting down to when you start looking at these sites that are using the more grid layouts, the CSS based on them. All right. So moving on, our next one, we talk a little bit about, one of the other questions we saw was, about deployment and hosting in an Azure web app and or an Azure VM. I mean, this is all .NET, which is why I think a lot of people tend to gravitate toward Azure. I mean, Microsoft makes sure that their stuff that they're building works pretty good within their environment. And I think they do a really good job. And I've been using Azure since before. I guess it was still Azure, but there's a whole lot of renaming that went on during an area of Microsoft where Visual Studio Online, I think is what it was at one point, which now that has a whole different meaning for people of today.
Azure was called Windows Azure originally.
Yeah. Windows Azure. And they said, you know what, it's not really Windows anymore. That's where you get to this .NET Core, which .NET is no longer synonymous with Windows. It shouldn't be. I mean, with .NET 5 now, while it still has the name .NET, and when people think .NET, they think Windows, .NET is a cross-platform framework. .NET 5 and above, .NET Core are all meant to be run on not just Windows environments, but Linux and Mac OS if you wanted, and whatever new flavor of operating system we decide to come out. I mean, I'm sure we'd probably run on Chrome OS too. I don't know. I haven't really messed with Chrome OS at all, but that's what they're geared toward. That's what it's designed for. So while we ask, deployment and hosting in an Azure Web App, you can do that.
Mm-hmm.
But you're not constrained anymore by that. You don't have to use an Azure Web App. No, I mean, you can use an Azure Web App, but you don't have to use a Windows-based operating system on it. You can use the Linux, any flavor of Linux, actually, if you wanted. So,
last weekend, I deployed a .NET 5 app, ASP.NET Core .NET 5, to a Linux app service in Azure.
Nice.
I just, this was like, I'm just getting this thing live. I copied the files up through FTP and turned it on, and it ran, and that was it.
Nice.
That was it. Now they're doing a whole bunch of crazy stuff behind the scenes with Docker, running your code in a Docker container on Linux to provide isolation. But yeah, you do a build, you do a publish, at the command line, .NET publish pointed at your project or solution. You get the code, you get that output, you copy that up through FTP, you run your app, and it just works. It just works.
I will say, if you've not used it, they've done a tremendous amount of work with right-click publish in Visual Studio. With the latest versions of Visual Studio, right-click publish no longer is, I think it's still kind of a bad word. People still don't like to hear it, but it's a lot better. You can actually right-click and publish directly to your Azure Web App, to that web app instance. Like Sean was talking how he FTP'd to it. You don't have to do that. You can right-click and publish. You basically start linking Visual Studio with your Azure account, and boom, like that, you're actually up and running.
And along with that, not only just with your, from Visual Studios or whatnot, we heavily leverage Azure DevOps, and we have our MVC sites that we, as soon as we are ready, the code's done, we move it to our release branch, we do a release branch, and it automatically builds it, checks it, makes sure there's no compiler errors. And then we have a release pipeline that will then deploy to this, deploy to that, spin up we use dev slots. So we deploy to a hot swap, and we spin it up, and then we swap it with the live. And all that's just clicks to the buttons within our DevOps, which is something that in the future I'm going to be hopefully blogging a little bit more about and showing you how to set that up. But using DevOps as well, and that's like kind of the platform right now to use for your code repos and stuff. It's super easy to make one-click deployments, and it's, very integrated with Azure if you want to deploy to that and stuff. So I would encourage that if your organization hasn't looked into DevOps, to definitely look into DevOps, get your stuff into Git repositories, learn Git, and use that if you're like an old TFS type of guy, and start working through those processes. Because once you get it down, like it took us a little bit to get everything down, but now that's there. All our deployments are like, all right, click, click, and click, and then watch it run.
Definitely agree with Trevor on that. Don't make what I did your normal deployment process. I was developing in VS Code and using all the command line utilities, so I didn't have the Visual Studio publish integration, which is definitely a much nicer experience. I just wanted to make sure, I need to get this thing live. Does it work? And yes,
and it does.
Yes.
Nice. That's good. That's definitely good news. So,
And I'm looking forward, air quotes, to the next version when everything's .NET Core. I only say air quotes because I have to upgrade all my tools again. But that way, then both things can be on Linux and both things can be on that shared platform,
right.
which is going to be amazing. So I'm really glad that kind of goes moving in that direction with it.
And that Linux hosting is it's noticeably cheaper than the Windows hosting.
That's something I've always noticed is like, and that's why I kind of really like the fact that we've gone .NET Core. Is hosting that front end now is trivial in Linux. It's magnitudes cheaper in my opinion. As someone who watches the dollars that he spends, or actually my wife watches the dollars I spend, and make sure I don't spend too much of them. But yes, it much cheaper. And the other thing I want to say about the DevOps is what I've liked is you can take your developer out of the deployment process altogether if you want. You can put that up into a PM's hands, and if you're brave enough, put it into the customer's hands to say, you like it, you can go with it. But I also want, what are your guys' opinions on deploy slots? So I've used them in the past. I know the benefits of them. I know why we use them, and we use them primarily because we want to get as close to zero downtime as possible on a customer site. And the benefit of the deploy slot is you can basically take that cold start load of your site and you're moving it to a different slot, a different area. And basically, so at that point, you have two sites running on your production type environment. And then once you're ready to go, you say, okay, it's good, it's up. I've done a preliminary smoke test using this slot here. I can then just click a button, and there's some magic firewall stuff that happens behind the scenes. And now everything is pointed over to your deploy slot.
Yeah, super easy. And that's exactly why we do that. Go ahead, Jerome. Sorry, doing that.
Oh, it's like you mentioned, and it sounds really cool, and it is really cool. Although there might be some things that you need to do prior before really executing it correctly, because we've been using them quite for some while, or trying to use them for some while. But things that you typically run into are like the smart search that you host, or the media files, and if you don't handle them and make sure that they can be used by both the apps, then slots will not be an option. So things that we've seen maturing in our process is we've leveraging Azure Search for the search. We've using blob storage for the media, and once we've did that and really created that that standalone application which doesn't have any dependencies with its storage, so we can wipe it clean every time we do a deployment. That's when we really could start to achieve the benefits of using deployment slots. And,
that is the point that Jerome pointed out, though. You need to use like blob storage. You really can't do the on-prem files and use the deployment slots. Right. So that all new projects, I always say, hey, we really should be using blob storage, because it's hard to make that transition if you already started it one way. It's possible. There's scripts that can do it, but it's a little bit of a nightmare for that. So make sure that from developers, as you're building new sites, use that blob storage. It's not really that expensive, I don't think, at all. And it's pretty easy to hook up. So it's like usually just a couple of connection strings and like a couple lines of code to turn it on. It's all in documentation. But that way you can do that swap. And then as you're doing your deployments through DevOps, it literally, like I'm looking at my pipeline for release, there's only 3 tasks. Deploy to the hot swap is one task that's already built into DevOps, a PowerShell script to actually hit the site and warm it up, and then a swap slots that's already in DevOps. So I don't even need to know the PowerShell commands for a lot of this stuff. I just click and configure.
Another thing to know that could be a gotcha is the slot runs out of the same resource set that the main site runs out of. So if you're running that site really lean on available resources, if your memory's up around 80%, which is good for a cost perspective, right? But if you deploy a slot and that thing needs as much resource as the main site does, or even some percentage of that, you could see your sites running out of resources. So you need to have the headroom to basically run 2 sites at the same time in the same amount of resources.
Maybe to add one more thing about the slots, and which maybe is not that directly linked to it, but is very powerful feature, is that you can have these slot specific settings which allow you to enable features to do some, let's say, testing in production, I think they call it. So you can already roll out new features, have them ready on the slot, let the customer or the team look at them, and once they think it's production ready, you swap the slot, and then the feature gets out of the development stage and hits the production environment. So that's also something that you can benefit using the deployment slots.
And DevOps has, of course, also as part of the releases, they have variables, so you can set different variables in your configs based on which part of that deployment you're going to. So connection strings, settings, even debug settings, so all that's built in, which is also fantastic.
Yeah, Jeroen mentioned that. That was the thing I was going to point out. Is one thing is be very mindful of your settings, your slot settings, whether they're slot specific or they're ones that are new to this version of the site. Because once you flip them over, those settings are going to go with it, typically, unless you mark it as a slot only. But if you've added new settings, you need to go on your next deploy. You need to make sure you put those new settings in there. That's something that's burned us. Is the fact is, as we move things forward into the pipe, we'll move it into the deploy slot. It may have 2 or 3 new settings. When we swap them, we're now missing those settings on that deployment slot. And so that's something you need to go back after the fact and add those, so that way when you deploy the next version, you're not stuck trying to figure out, this worked. Why does this not work anymore? What am I missing? So.
One slot specific setting that I would recommend to everyone is to disable the web farms on the slot, because typically you wouldn't have those additional slots as a web farm license, and you will run into some issues with that if you deploy to a slot which is in the web farm but not is part of your license. So what we've typically ended up with is disable the web farms on the slots, and after it swaps, and then it will be picked up with the web farms again to prevent license errors. So, a couple of cents of mine.
Great. Okay, so we're coming down. We're actually a little past time. If you guys don't mind, I got one more thing that we can talk about, and I'm really curious of what your opinion is, because you've used it and you all have varying experience in the other areas of Kentico experience and in the older versions. What's missing from Kentico Experience 13? In your opinion, what's missing? What is it what's that feature that's missing to push us over the edge to say, this is, I mean, it already is the greatest of all time, but, just to raise that bar to keep the competitors at bay?
I'd say the main thing is a solid caching strategy, which they're working on. So, like I said, there is no output caching. It's not a experience thing. It's a .NET Core thing. So there are cache tags that can cache into here, but to hook that up with the dependency, resetting and stuff like that is something that Kentico is working on right now, trying to figure out what is the path forward for that to recommend that. Aside from that, there's just a couple of last small issues that I think are already scheduled for development. So they're coming through a lot with getting any remaining items out there. But that's a big one for me, is figuring out that whole caching and integration with the dependencies.
I think .NET 5 support, and it kind of works, but there's still some issues that are being worked on right now.
Yep.
I hope to see that soon. I would love to kind of skip .NET Core 3.1 for our internal libraries and things, and just flip everything to .NET 5 going forward, and not have to look back. But other than technology things, I really think the thing that's missing is our experience working with these things, because we have a decade or more of, for some developers, 15, 16 years experience working in web forms. And that's just not how things are going to be done going forward. And we have a lot of tricks and solutions, and just, you go look at the DevNet forums, and there's so much knowledge and experience built up there around web forms and Portal Engine and how all that stuff works. And you could search in there and you could find a solution to your problem pretty quickly. Someone has run across it. Someone has found a solution to it. But that's not going to be the case with Experience 13 or with .NET Core and Experience. As beautiful as that coupling is, we're going to run into problems. We're going to need to come up with new solutions. And I think that's just, it's going to be a growing pain. And I think that's where the community really comes in to help everyone, is that we're all in this together. We're all moving forward together. And you could look at it as, oh, this is going to be a slog. This is going to be a real pain. But you could also look at it as an opportunity that we can all, kind of set the tone, set the bar for what we're going to do going forward, and collaborate and, help each other solve these problems. But yeah, that's where my head is what are you going to do when you run into that problem and no one's ever seen it before, because you're the first person to do that thing with experience in .NET Core?
I think I just touched on it with the slots. Web Forms is still pretty heavy inside the solution, and I think a good alternative to it to handle session state outside the CMS and not have a web form that basically acts as a sort of cache busting mechanism. That will be really a good addition to the platform. So I hope to see where the direction goes with the newest refreshes that are coming up.
Yeah, maybe Redis or gRPC or something.
Yeah,
that would be cool.
Yeah.
That will be, that's why we need .NET 5 support. And for those who don't know, I did that. I tried, when .NET 5 came out, I tried to upgrade our Dancing Goat sample site. I got out of it because I was excited to test some of these cool new features of C# 9 and everything inside of, the ASP.NET Core MVC application, and it didn't work. We're using some methods that were obsolete in 3.1. They were marked obsolete, though you could still use them. But guess what, folks? If you use something that's obsolete, at some point, they're actually going to remove it, which is what happened. In .NET 5, they removed the method, which all of a sudden we start getting errors. It happens to the best of us, folks. We use things, it works, it's great. Sometimes you're like, okay, we're going to go back and fix that. And then it just gets deprioritized until, oops, now we need it. But it's on the horizon. I think it's coming in the next refresh. Don't quote me on it, because it may not. They've got a lot of things they're working on. And that refresh, by the way, those are what we're calling our new hot fixes. Well, no, hot fixes are going to be a thing. The concept and idea with a refresh is it's not just a bug fix. It's not just a security fix. Those are still going to come, and those are going to come, as frequent as they need to. But with the refresh, we're going to actually give you additional new features. And so with each refresh is going to come some new functionality. Maybe it's something you care about, maybe it's something you don't. But that's kind of the mindset going forward, is we're not going to wait a whole year to give you something new and exciting. We're going to start now. And right now, I think, and I don't remember, the cadence we want to get to is at least once a month for a refresh. I don't know that we're there yet. Like we said earlier, we're still working on recreating that back end and getting it out of web forms, which is what it's still in, and moving that over to a React and a different technology stack. So they're working side by side, doing both things at once. So it's kind of, sometimes in order for the future to come, we got to put the past on a hold a little bit. But the cool thing is, once we start releasing the next vNext of Kentico Experience, by the way, the number nomenclature is going away. After 13 is the last version you're going to see. Starting next year, it's just Experience, and that's all you're going to see. We will have versioning on the NuGet packages and stuff, but from now on, there will be no major versions in the name of the product anymore. So next year it's going to be Kentico Experience. Code name is Odyssey. So we should have some fun, cool logos and stuff coming up on that. A whole bunch of maybe different. I think Trevor had some, minor version release names there for some of the Odyssey things, but it's coming. And with that, we don't want to wait again until like July or August and say, oh, hey, here's your first release of Odyssey. We're going to give you that MVP as quick as possible, and then we're going to continually refresh that MVP of Odyssey as quick as possible. So at least I think a monthly cadence on that as well. So you should start seeing a lot of the new stuff and see how we build it. On that also, we want feedback. So I'm trying to pull up our product board here because you can help us. You can tell us what we're getting right and what we're not getting right. Here we go. And let me add that back to the stream. There we go. So we have our product board here. And we have different ways that you can help us understand what's important to you. Not just for developers, not just for business, for everyone who uses Kentico Experience. And you're just going to go click that submit idea and put it in there. And that's going to get it right in front of our product manager's eyes. So they're going to see it. And then once it pops in here, you can come in here and pick the idea, properties for form builder sections. I like that. And how important is it to you? Vote. Which features do you want to see most? We don't want to do this in a silo anymore. We want you to tell us what is important. What do we need to focus on? So there's been a big push towards doing that and engaging with the community. Guys, I don't have it up there, but what is your favorite way to interact with I know as MVPs, you get a little bit of better access to some of the product teams, but where do you see a lot of engagement? Where would you like to see it? What's your favorite medium for that?
Definitely Twitter for me. That's where I see most of the discussions and people sharing blogs or code they're working on or ideas is definitely on Twitter. It's become a place for developers to gather and to discuss. I think I heard this on a podcast recently. I thought it was really interesting. Twitter's become the de facto place to share socially about software development because GitHub doesn't have very strong social features. If it did, people would probably be gathering on GitHub and using that to share. That said, the Kentico GitHub organization has a discussion on the home repository where you can go and ask questions and could put that in. Ryan, if you could
put that in the chat.
Yeah, so there I dropped in the discussion that was about this discussion panel, and developers can go there and just start chatting about experience or anything Kentico related. But yeah, for me, a lot of it's Twitter. And also the Kentico community Slack is a good place to go and ask questions and get help or talk about ideas.
Jeroen, Trevor, what do you guys think? Where's your favorite place to interact with the community?
My favorite place is probably going to be the Slack channel. I'll admit I'm a Twitter noob. I actually can't remember last time I logged into Twitter just because I have so much in my life. So it's hard for me to always do a lot of social media stuff. But the Slack channel, the Kentico community Slack channels where I interact a lot with people. And also, of course, we have our Kentico MVP Slack channel, which is internal to Kentico, where I do a lot of interaction not only with the other MVPs, but directly with the Kentico developers, which has been awesome. That, there's a time in the years past, where there's this huge disconnect between developers and even the Kentico staff. We rarely got much, interaction. And now there's a lot of conversation going on. We can direct access the Kentico devs and express different needs and stuff like that. And they're listening. So, so those are my channels. And just, again, it's awesome that communication is back. It was there way long ago. It subsided. And now they're back really trying to be developer focused and listen to us and make the platform even better.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. They're back because we've been with Kentico quite some while, and we've seen a diversity of different platforms. I mean, they've used user voice in the early days, and now they're back using the product board. So that's a really good way to reach out. I think reaching out on a platform like Twitter, where the product team is also online, or I've seen Dominic also post something on LinkedIn. So I think LinkedIn will be also a very popular platform to share feedback. And I think also the beta program is a very good way of providing your feedback, because Kentico does a really great job of sharing what they've already built during a specific period. Although these periods will be shortened. Previously, the periods will be over the time of a year, and providing the betas what gave us as MVPs and also the other developers in the Kentico community the opportunity to look and test drive these features and give very early feedback. So hope that with the refreshes and the upcoming releases, some similar approach will be available for everyone to tag along.
Yep, and I want to add there, we're moving to the agile mindset here at Kentico, or at Kentico Experience Team. We are, I think the content team's been on that for a while, but we're moving to that train now, which is why you're seeing the more constant releases, the more constant feedback and reviews and reflections. What went right? What went wrong? What can we do better? And we don't just want to do that internally. I think I said it earlier. We don't want this to be a siloed process anymore. It is a bring it back to the community. Let the community help us, help ourselves. We're even, and I'm going to throw this out there, is we're even looking at ways to allow the community to start contributing back into the Kentico experience code base. I mean, the MVPs have asked for it. And I know Sean's one of the key ones right up there. He wants to help. He wants to help out there. I know Trevor does. Jeroen, they all want to help out. They want to help the Kentico Experience team get new features in there that maybe they don't have the bandwidth to do. And it's just not going to be siloed to the MVPs. As soon as we can get all the lawyer stuff resolved, figure out what we can and cannot quote unquote open source, instead of being maybe source open. I mean, we may start out with source open, but I think the intent is to make as many features as we can possible open source. So we can start, letting you contribute, be part of the product, very similar to what Microsoft has done with the .NET product. I mean, they gave it away. There's a .NET Foundation, which now has oversight over .NET, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong on that. That's the way I understand it. They have the oversight, and Microsoft, though, is just a key contributor to that framework and that platform. So that's where Kentico wants to get to. We like what Microsoft's doing. We've seen the benefits of it, and we're going to get on that train because it's the train to be on. All right, folks, I'm out of coffee. I think that means it's time to wrap up here. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. If you're watching in the future, hello from the past. Let us know in those comments, wherever they are, what you like, what you want to see on the next show. This is the first. I consider this like the soft launch here. But we want you to be involved. What's the thing that you want to talk about, you want to hear about? You have a link to our discussion panel in there. Let us know in there. Let me know. Let us know in the comments. And hit us up on the social media. Until next time, folks, I'm Ryan. This is Sean, Trevor, and Jeroen. And we'll see you next time.
See ya.
See ya, everyone.